Hey beautiful, have you considered subscribing to our channel? Help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers.
Jake stood by the front window, staring out at the driveway, his stomach tightening with each passing moment. His father, frail and quiet in the living room, had just been released from the hospital after a series of heart attacks had nearly taken his life. His condition was delicate, and every second was a battle to keep him stable. The nurse, Melanie, had been a godsend, arriving each morning like clockwork, her presence bringing the sort of comfort that only a trained medical professional could provide. She was precise, patient, and kind. He couldn't ask for anyone better, but today that tranquility was shattered. Jake watched as the familiar figure of Linda, the HOA president, marched up his driveway, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement, like a drumbeat signaling disaster. He hadn't seen her in weeks, but he knew exactly why she was here. The HOA had been breathing down his neck for months about the rules of his neighborhood, rules that now seemed to extend far beyond lawn care and garbage bins. As Linda reached the front door, her posture stiff and authoritative, Jake's pulse quickened. He could already hear her voice in his head, shrill and demanding. She had a way of making every interaction feel like a confrontation, and Jake knew this visit wouldn't be any different. The doorbell rang, a curt, insistent tone. He didn't need to answer, it was already clear what was coming. But still he opened it. "Jake," Linda's voice sliced through the air, her expression smug. "We need to talk." He tried to keep his face neutral, but the words rushed out anyway. "What's this about now?" Linda's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a thin, tight smile. "I've received several complaints about the medical activity on this property. You know the rules, right?" Jake's confusion deepened. "Medical activity?" He gestured behind him, toward the living room, where Melanie was currently helping his father adjust his position in the recliner. "My father's health is not a violation of your rules. He's recovering from serious surgery." "Oh, I know," Linda said, her tone dripping with mock sympathy. "But the thing is, you have a nurse coming in every day, unannounced, without approval. That's a violation of our HOA code. We don't allow for unsupervised, unregistered visitors without proper notice. You should have filed a request. The rules are clear, Jake." Jake felt a flicker of anger rise in him, hot and fast. He took a steadying breath. He couldn't let this woman, this petty, vindictive figure who thrived on controlling every inch of their lives, undermine his father's recovery. He stepped aside, motioning for her to come in, if only to give her the chance to see the situation for herself. "I'll speak with Melanie," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "But you need to understand, this is my father's health. He's not a subject of your HOA rules." Linda, unfazed, pushed past him into the house, her heels clicking with each determined step. She was already walking toward the living room, her eyes scanning the walls, the furnishings, as though inspecting for any other offenses against her. Precious rules. Melanie looked up from her task, the momentary surprise crossing her face before she quickly masked it with professionalism. "Hello, Mrs. Cooper. Is there something I can help you with?" Jake saw the way Linda's gaze flicked toward the nurse, dismissive yet calculating. "I'm afraid you'll have to leave," she said coldly. "You're in violation of HOA codes, and I can't let this go on any longer. This is a residential area, not a place for medical professionals to run rampant." Jake's heart dropped. He'd been expecting this, but hearing it out loud felt like a punch to the gut. "You can't be serious," he said, moving between the two women. "Melanie is a licensed professional, and she has every right to care for my father. He needs her." Linda crossed her arms. "It doesn't matter if she's licensed. It doesn't matter if you're desperate. The HOA exists to maintain the integrity of this community. We have rules, and they apply to everyone, Jake. Everyone." Jake's fists clenched at his sides. He wanted to yell, to make her understand just how outrageous this was. His father's health was on the line, yet Linda was concerned with what? Rules about visitors? This was about control, nothing more. "Fine," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "I'll look into the rules again, but I won't have you harassing my nurse. I won't allow it." "Don't be foolish," Linda said, her voice dripping with venom. "I'm not harassing anyone. I'm enforcing the community's rules. You're welcome to file an appeal, but that will take time. And by then, the fine will have been issued." A cold shiver of dread crawled up Jake's spine as Linda turned on her heel and walked toward the door. But before she left, she shot one last parting glance toward Melanie. "And don't think I won't be watching." The door slammed, behind her with a finality that left Jake seething. He turned to Melanie, who was already starting to pack up her medical supplies. She looked exhausted, defeated. "Don't let her get to you," Jake said, trying to offer reassurance. Melanie gave a weary smile, though there was sadness in her eyes. "It's not about me, Jake. I know the rules, but you're right. This isn't about rules. This is about something much bigger." Jake's fists clenched again, this time out of sheer frustration. "I'm going to put a stop to this," he muttered, his mind racing. "She's not going to get away with it." But as Linda's words echoed in his head, Jake realized that it wasn't just his father's care that was under threat. It was his home, his peace, and everything that had once been safe. Linda's presence felt like a shadow now, hovering over him. He could already feel the tension thickening, and this, he realized, was just the beginning. The days following Linda's visit felt like an unrelenting storm cloud hanging over Jake's head. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. It wasn't just Linda's threats that kept him on edge, it was the way she seemed. To think she had the power to control every aspect of his life. His father's health was delicate, his family was under enough stress, and now this woman had decided to make it personal. Melanie continued to visit each day, though she was clearly becoming more uncomfortable under Linda's watchful eye. Every time she parked in the driveway, Linda seemed to appear out of nowhere, taking pictures of the car, jotting down notes in her little notebook, or dropping off passive-aggressive notes at the front door. It was all starting to feel like a game to her, and Jake was playing right into it. One afternoon, after an especially tense visit from Linda, Jake decided it was time to take matters into his own hands. He wasn't going to let her continue to manipulate the situation. He'd already tried being civil, trying to explain his father's medical needs, but it was clear that Linda wasn't interested in reason. She was interested in control, and the more he let her have, the more she would take. The next day, he received a letter in the mail from the HOA. The envelope was thick, official-looking, and sealed with a red warning sticker. His heart sank as he tore it open. The letter was a formal notice of a fine for violating the HOA's community rules that Jake hadn't even known existed. His stomach churned as he read through the convoluted paragraphs of legal jargon. Essentially, they were claiming that Melanie had been operating an unapproved medical service, a breach of HOA protocol that could result in a hefty fine. Jake slammed the letter onto the kitchen table, his mind racing. There was no way he was paying this fine, and there was no way he was going to let Linda get away with this. But what could he do? The HOA had the law on their side, or so it seemed. And every time he tried to speak reason into Linda, she shot him down with her smug superiority. His frustration was growing, but so was something else, a deep, burning sense of injustice. She had no right to bully him, to make his life harder. She had no idea what it was like to care for someone who was struggling every day just to stay alive. And now, she was threatening to take away the one thing that made his father's recovery possible: Melanie's care. That evening, after his father had settled in for the night, Jake sat down with his laptop and began to do some digging. He wasn't going to go down without a fight. He spent hours scrolling through HOA regulations, looking for any loopholes, any shred of evidence that could prove they were wrong. He needed to find a way to flip this on its head, to show Linda that she didn't have all the power. And just when he was starting to feel like he'd hit a dead end, he found something that made his heart race. Linda's name came up on several different websites. She had been involved in multiple neighborhood disputes over the years. There were complaints about her meddling in personal lives, making decisions that had nothing to do with the HOA's original purpose. One particularly telling post on a community forum detailed how Linda had once fined a family for having too many visitors over the holidays, claiming they violated parking regulations. It was petty, it was vindictive, and it was the perfect ammunition Jake needed. The more he read, the more a plan began to take shape in his mind. Jake wasn't going to confront Linda head-on. She had too much power in the HOA, too many allies, but he didn't need to fight her directly. He had something far stronger on his side, her own arrogance. The next morning, Jake called in a favor from an old friend, Mike, who worked in local journalism. Mike had always been someone who loved uncovering scandals, and Jake knew that if anyone could help expose Linda's hypocrisy, it was him. They met at a coffee shop, and Jake explained everything: Linda's harassment, the fine, the deep-rooted power trip she was on. "Sounds like a perfect story," Mike said, his eyes gleaming. "We'll make her the villain. People love a good HOA nightmare. But we'll need to build a case. You'll need to gather more dirt, get some more people to speak out, and we'll need to make sure she's the one who's caught with her hand in the cookie jar." Jake nodded, the plan beginning to take form. "I'll talk to the neighbors. I know I'm not the only one she's messed with." Over the next few days, Jake began reaching out to others in the neighborhood subtly at first. He didn't want to draw too much attention to himself. He needed to gather information without alerting Linda. Slowly, stories began to trickle in. One neighbor had been fined for painting his fence a color Linda didn't approve of. Another had been fined for planting a tree that, according to Linda, blocked someone's view of the street. They were all small things, but they painted a picture of a woman who was more interested in power than in serving the community. Jake recorded everything. He took notes, saved screenshots, and even managed to get a few neighbors to go on record, sharing their grievances about Linda. The more he collected, the clearer it became. Linda wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president. She was a bully, someone who used the rules as a weapon to push people around. And now, she was using them to threaten his family. He felt a surge of satisfaction as he pieced together the puzzle. There was no way she could continue to get away with this. But even as he plotted her downfall, he knew that things were only going to escalate from here. Linda wasn't going to go down without a fight, and when she finally realized what Jake was up to, it would be too late. Jake sat in his living room, the weight of his plan pressing down on him like an invisible hand. The letters from the HOA, the complaints, Linda's sneering threats. He had everything he needed to expose her for the tyrant she was. But something kept gnawing at him. He knew that going public was a risk, one that could blow up in his face if he didn't execute it just right. This wasn't just about a fine anymore. It was about justice, about bringing down someone who thought she could control his life and his father's care. That evening, after dinner, Jake sat down with his laptop again, reviewing his findings. He'd contacted several neighbors, all of whom had complaints about Linda's bullying tactics. He had gathered written accounts, even recorded conversations. But now, it was time to escalate. He needed the world to see Linda for what she truly was, an authoritarian who hid behind the facade of rules and regulations. And to do that, he had to make sure the public, the HOA board, and even the local press were all involved. The first step was easy. He sent an email to Mike, his journalist friend, attaching everything he had so far: the screenshots of Linda's overreaching fines, the testimonies from the neighbors who had been terrorized by her, and most importantly, the video footage of Linda harassing Melanie during that first confrontation. If Mike could spin the story right, It would be more than just a neighborhood squabble. It would be a scandal. The second part of the plan was where things got more delicate. Jake had learned from his research that Linda had a few secrets hidden beneath her spotless HOA image. One of the most important of these was her obsession with appearances, her reputation as the upstanding citizen of the neighborhood. She was the one who hosted HOA meetings, organized block parties, and made sure everyone knew she was the glue holding the community together. In short, Linda had an ego the size of Texas, and Jake was going to exploit it. Jake set up a fake email account, crafting an anonymous tip that would land in the inbox of the local community blog. The tip would expose Linda's pattern of abuses, focusing on her manipulation of the HOA rules for personal gain, her vendettas against those who didn't conform to her ideal of the perfect neighborhood. He knew that once the story broke, Linda's carefully constructed image would begin to unravel. But Jake wasn't just after her reputation. He wanted her to feel the consequences of her actions. Public humiliation was a powerful weapon. It wasn't long before the first piece of his plan fell into place. Mike, ever the eager journalist, had picked up the story and was already drafting an article. He called Jake the next morning with good news. "I've got the angle, Jake. I'm starting with the letter you sent me, the one from the HOA fine, and I'm making sure to emphasize that this is just the tip of the iceberg. I've got a few neighbors on the record now, and I'm about to hit the HOA for a comment. They're going to love this." Jake leaned back in his chair, his pulse quickening. "I just want to make sure they know what she's been doing. I want her to know that she can't just bully people around anymore." Mike's voice dropped to a conspiratorial tone. "Don't worry. Once this hits the public, she won't be able to hide. We're going to make sure of it." The next few days were a whirlwind. Mike's article dropped on the community blog, sparking immediate reactions from readers. Linda's actions, once hidden behind the walls of HOA meetings, were now out in the open for everyone to see. The comment section exploded with outrage. People who had been too afraid to speak up before now had a platform to share their experiences. One neighbor after another recounted their own run-ins with Linda, from arbitrary fines to accusations of property violations that were purely fabricated. But Linda wasn't one to back down easily. She fired off a public response claiming that the accusations were false and that the neighborhood was just filled with disgruntled residents who didn't understand the importance of maintaining the community's standards. She painted herself as the victim, the misunderstood enforcer of rules, and tried to brush off the allegations with her usual smugness. Jake watched it all unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and growing tension. The story was picking up steam, but Linda wasn't crumbling yet. Her reputation was starting to crack, but she still had power. She had influence in the HOA, and she had her loyal followers who believed in her mission. Jake needed something more to tip the scales. The turning point came when he received a call from one of the neighbors, a woman named Sarah who had been vocal about her own run-ins with Linda. She had something new to add to the story, an email she had accidentally received from Linda, sent to a few of the other HOA members. In it, Linda had detailed plans to use the HOA's influence to drive out anyone who didn't meet her standards, including Jake. Jake's heart raced as he read through the email. It was the smoking gun he needed, proof that Linda had been manipulating the HOA for personal gain, using her position to target anyone who stood in her way. With this, he could not only expose her as a bully, but he could ruin her chances of ever holding power in the neighborhood again. Jake immediately sent the email to Mike, knowing this would be the final nail in the coffin. The article went live the next morning, and this time it was a bombshell. The headline read, "HOA President Caught Using Community Rules as a Personal Weapon." The email was attached, and the explosive details of Linda's manipulation were laid bare for all to see. The backlash was swift and brutal. Linda tried to respond, but it was too late. The community was turning against her. In every meeting, at every social event, people were whispering about the scandal. Linda's once perfect reputation was in tatters, and she couldn't control the narrative anymore. But Jake knew this wasn't the end. Linda was still dangerous, still capable of making his life difficult. He wasn't finished with her yet, not by a long shot. The morning of the HOA meeting, Jake stood in front of his bathroom mirror, his reflection staring back at him with a mixture of resolve and anticipation. This was the day everything would come to a head. The community had been buzzing with the fallout from the article, and Linda, once the undisputed queen of the neighborhood, was now the pariah. But the battle was far from over. She was powerful, and her desperation to cling to control could still pose a threat. As the time approached, for the HOA meeting, Jake's phone buzzed with messages from his neighbors. They were all talking about Linda, some expressing their support, others venting their frustrations. But there was one message that caught his eye, a warning from Sarah. "She's got something up her sleeve. Watch your back. She's not done yet." Jake's gut twisted. He had known from the start that Linda wouldn't go down quietly, but hearing it from Sarah only confirmed his fears. She was cornered now, and when a predator is cornered, it becomes more dangerous. Arriving at the community center, Jake's eyes scanned the room. The usual smugness in Linda's posture had evaporated. Instead of sitting at the head of the table, calling the shots as she always had, she was now huddled with a few loyal supporters, those who still believed in her. Twisted version of the neighborhood's rules. She barely made eye contact with Jake as he walked in, but he could feel the tension between them, crackling in the air like static electricity. The meeting began with the usual niceties, but Jake could feel Linda's simmering rage under her. Carefully cultivated veneer of calm. She was waiting for her moment to strike back, and sure enough, it came sooner than expected. "Before we proceed," Linda's voice rang out, sharper than usual, "I'd like to address the lies that have been spread about me. The accusations in the blog, the rumors, it's all nothing but a smear campaign from a disgruntled neighbor who doesn't understand the importance of maintaining our community standards. I will not stand by while this goes unchecked." Jake's eyes narrowed as Linda turned her gaze toward him. She knew who was behind the story, and she wasn't about to let him get away with it. Her voice dripped with venom as she continued. "This man," she gestured toward Jake, "has made it his mission to destabilize the very foundation of our neighborhood. He has broken the rules, and now he wants to make everyone else suffer with him." There it was. The first volley in the counterattack. Linda was attempting to twist the narrative, trying to shift the blame onto Jake. But he wasn't going to let her manipulate the room like she had done so many times before. His heart pounded in his chest as he stood, knowing this was his moment, to deliver the knockout punch. "Actually, Linda," Jake's voice cut through the air, calm but filled with authority, "the only one who's been destabilizing this neighborhood is you. You've used your position to bully, intimidate, and manipulate everyone who didn't fall in line with your vision of what this community should be. You've crossed every line, and it's time for that to stop." The room fell into stunned silence. Linda's eyes flashed with fury, but Jake could see the doubt creeping in. He had her right where he wanted her. But she wasn't going to let this go down without a fight. "You have no idea what it's like to be in charge of a community, Jake," Linda shot back, her voice tinged with bitterness. "You have no idea how hard it is to make decisions that are best for everyone, even when it means stepping on a few toes. You're too busy playing the victim to see the bigger picture." Jake shook his head, the words coming easily now. "The bigger picture is about trust, Linda. It's about doing what's right, not what's convenient for you. You've used your power to crush anyone who disagreed with you, and now the entire neighborhood knows who you really are. And I'm not the only one who sees it. The people you've hurt, my family, your so-called community, we're done being your pawns." Linda's eyes narrowed into slits as her face twisted into a sneer. "You think this is over? You think you've won just because you've spread a few lies?" Jake didn't flinch. I haven't spread any lies. The truth is out now. You've been using your position for years to terrorize people who didn't fall in line with your perfect little world. You're not the hero of this story, Linda. You're the villain. The room, once divided, was now turning. Some of the neighbors exchanged looks of disbelief, while others nodded in agreement, murmuring among themselves. The seed of doubt was taking root. Linda's hold on the room was slipping, but she wasn't done. With a final cold glare at Jake, she stood up, her hands shaking with barely contained rage. "You don't know what you're dealing with," she hissed. "You think you've won? You've made a big mistake. This isn't over. You'll regret this." Jake took a deep breath, his voice steady as he spoke again. "You're right about one thing, Linda. This isn't over. But you're not the one who gets to decide how it ends." With that, he turned and walked toward the back of the room. He could feel the weight of every eye in the room on him, but he didn't look back. He knew that the battle had been won. The people had spoken. The truth had been laid bare. Linda's time in power was finished. As Jake walked out of the community center, the bright afternoon sun hit his face, and for the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of relief wash over him. It wasn't just the victory. It was the knowledge that he had stood up for his family, for what was right. Linda's reign of terror was over. Behind him, Linda's voice echoed down the hallway, but Jake didn't turn back. He had won. Goodbye. Justice had been served, and he knew it wouldn't be long before she would face the consequences of her actions. And just as he reached his car, his phone buzzed again. It was a message from Mike. "It's all over the news now. You did it, Jake. The story's viral. You won." Jake smiled, the weight lifting from his shoulders. The villain had been exposed, and the neighborhood had been freed from her grip. It was over, and justice had finally been served.